Good evening, everyone. My name is Honor Harger, and I'm the Executive Director of ArtScience Museum in Singapore. Welcome to a very special live event here at ArtScience at Home, the online program of ArtScience Museum. Tonight, we're joined by Tong Yee, the co-founder of the influential social enterprise, The Thought Collective, here in Singapore. He's going to be giving the final and culminating talk in our online conference, Feeling the Future. We're live on YouTube and on Facebook, and we welcome your input into tonight's event. We'd love to know who's with us, so please do come onto the comments section of either one of the two streams, say hello, and let us know where you're watching from. Later on, if you've got questions for Tong Yee, just pop them into the comments of the stream, and we'll see them as they come in. Before I introduce Tong Yee, I'd like to set the scene for you and share some thoughts on why tonight is such a meaningful event for us. We started ArtScience at Home, our online program, because of the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic has really led to the upheaval of the entire museum sector all around the world, as it's created chaos and heartbreak for many of us. When our museum closed to the public during Singapore's circuit breaker, we launched ArtScience at Home to take our stories to audiences as they carried on their lives as best they could from home. Many of the programs that we produced since we started in April have responded to the context of the pandemic through online talks that explore how we might adapt to uncertain futures. We've launched an education program for children that encourages empathy for the less appreciated members of our community, many of whom are most adversely impacted by COVID-19. And we've commissioned performances and films by artists who are in lockdown, which allows us to support our local arts community. But perhaps the most purposeful of these programs has been our online conference, Feeling the Future. Over the past 4 months, we've hosted a series of talks by futurists, educators, designers, activists, and architects that explore the complex emotions that we have towards a future at a time when the pandemic has created such anxiety and uncertainty. We originally intended that this conference would be a companion event for the exhibition 2219, Futures Imagined, which is on in the museum right now. 2219 is set in a Singapore that's been transformed by climate change 200 years from now. It includes work by 30 artists, designers, and writers from Singapore and around the world who have created environments that allow audiences to step into and become part of possible futures. Feeling the Future was designed to allow prominent speakers from Singapore to explore the emotions that the exhibition raised about the future. But the pandemic has given the Feeling the Future online talks new focus and new urgency. There's no one I would rather have closing this conference than tonight's speaker, Mr. Tong Yee. Tong Yee is a social entrepreneur and civil society leader in Singapore. He co-founded the School of Thought to promote innovation in education and now leads one of the largest social enterprises in Singapore, the Thought Collective, with his 2 co-directors. They recently launched Common Ground, a space that facilitates social innovation on issues of national concern. For me, Yee is one of the most cogent and profound commentators on the national psyche of Singapore. So to have him with us the week of Singapore's National Day feels very apt indeed. His talk tonight, entitled Leadership, Crisis and Emotion, will reflect on what crises like COVID-19 might tell us about who we are as a society. Please welcome Tong Yee.
Thank you, Honor. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to maybe just begin first by turning down my volume. Hold on a second. Yeah, okay. I'd like to just begin first by running some caveats over what this presentation may be like, especially for those of you who actually attend quite a few events within the Thought Collective. Typically, I would have anywhere between 2 to 3 hours over here to unpack a lot of what we are learning about Singapore as a society, what we are learning from multiple interviews we make together with leaders and how they begin to just even see, where Singapore is presently and where do we take it right within the future. But the context in which we are now currently, or at least I'm currently engaging you, is within this half an hour piece where I'll be sharing with you my own understanding of what I'm hearing around the idea of the future of Singapore, maybe even the future of our society. And I'm hoping itself that you could appreciate that half an hour actually is a very tight time to deal with something very complex. So I want to maybe apologize ahead of time to say that if some of you bring genuine anxiety or some real concern itself to hear something that might, make your world better, I'm not really sure that I can do that for you. The complexity itself of this particular whole, I guess, crisis right now is putting so much, I think, highlight over the diversity we have in Singapore. Everybody is really experiencing this pandemic completely differently, especially in a very different emotional space that people are coming from. And yeah, so I just want to say that over here, that I'll try my best itself to maybe broadly move through enough themes that would maybe trigger new perspectives and new insights for you. But I'm not here at all itself to begin to somehow address the level of maybe challenge or difficulty that you could be going through. Yeah, so I just want to start there first. So for those of you who are new to myself or new itself, my main work over here actually is within social enterprise work. Thought Collective, as Honor has actually kindly begun to introduce, is one of Singapore's largest social enterprise groups. We primarily focus upon emotional capital and social capital, meaning essentially itself trust in society and our capacity itself to bring personal leadership into intervening with these particular things. And traditionally, emotional things are actually very hard to begin to describe. So what we have done over the past, I would say 15 to 18 years of our work is to take what is intangible, almost fuzzy, and bring a lot of clarity in terms of how emotions can begin to move and how do we understand its structure and what is it telling us, right, about our everyday experience and about our lives. So the work from Thought Collective is really moved into this work that we're building in common ground. And the hope itself is really that even as cities all across the world begin to fragment or fracture for any one given reason, our work itself is to keep Singapore as, I wouldn't say, I don't think we can wish for always that we'll be united, but at least we'll be aligned and that we have at least a lot more understanding and empathy over what different facets of Singapore society could be experiencing or going through. Okay. So that's a brief introduction into the work that that me and my other directors and our entire team do. So without further ado, just let me begin with today, and we'll take you through some broad ideas, and we'll go into Q&A later. I'd like to begin today with something personal, and I guarantee you I'm not taking you down a memory lane or things like that, but rather I'd like to just begin to share with you an understanding of how is it we can begin to see the future. What I've done over here is that this given week is a week where the family actually is struggling quite a bit with my grandfather's ailing health. He's now currently 93. And we've been doing quite a bit at home to begin to, shift his belongings around, making sure itself, right, that he is well taken care of and making sure itself that all his belongings are also well taken care of. And my father has been finding a lot of old photographs, right? I don't know where he dragged these out from, but he brought them to me and placed them on my table. And I took a look at those old photographs, and it gave me a powerful, I guess, perspective to how I want to begin our talk about the future today. You see, the way that we see the future is deeply colored by our personal experiences, our personal history. To suggest over here that there's some sort of common future that every Singaporean can begin to think through or begin to aspire towards may have been possible when our lives were largely similar. Well, that's an illusion. I don't think it was ever really that similar. But never has there been a time over here, at least in Singapore's history, where we have as much diversity as we're experiencing now. And I'd like you to begin to just maybe start to plug into the idea that even if there's someone standing next to you right now attending this talk, or a spouse in which you have, or a child which you have, if we were to ask them over here what kind of future they'd like to see, you're going to get very different descriptions and depictions over particular ideas. Some will just say that some ideas are completely impossible. Some will say, oh my goodness, I would love a future like that. But whatever people are describing in that particular sense, I would suggest to you it's being colored by, I guess, how they live their past. So let me take you through these photographs and give you a sense of actually what's going on for me as an individual. Right? You can see in the top two photographs over there, this was actually taken, born in 1974. And that was the right picture was my mom and my dad. And that's me at 1 year old. And what's going on is you see the house right behind. That's actually my grandfather's house. And he was one of the wealthier men within the 1970s. He was a shipping tycoon. And what happened over here was that my mom actually was brought in as a bride to marry my father at the point in time. And I oftentimes itself I would begin to listen to stories about how she was experiencing the family, how she was experiencing this sudden wealth. And I think for herself, it was never a time over here where she was always, where she was, felt comfortable, right? And me being her first child and only son, she would often come to me and confide in me in terms of the struggle growing up in this particular wealthy, prestigious family. And in doing so over here, I remember in the very early years, I began to, I guess, develop a very strong, I guess, need to begin to support my mother, and also a disdain for the men in the family, because I perceived them as aggressors and that they had brought her a lot of pain. Ever since then itself, I've always been much more accustomed or feel safer speaking to the feminine. I don't mean females per se, but just simply speaking to the feminine. And in moving in that particular space over there, I think it's called a certain bias in me, where even if I look towards, big grandiose plans of the future, where we can achieve this or achieve that, I find that a very masculine energy, and one in which I personally wouldn't really take to. So sometimes over here, when people speak about the future and the grand idea of conquest and growth and things like that, my own history itself, I guess listening a lot of the stories of what my mom was going through, had me begin to see the future, or in a certain way. Lower pictures over here is the left. That's me when I think I was roughly about 17 to 18 years old or so. And this young man that you're looking at with the unnecessarily styled hair is got into a lot of trouble. Yeah. And I think even from that particular age over here, I always felt like somehow I was not included within groups or communities. I always felt slightly different. And the picture you're seeing on the right is that's me with my basketball team. And if I will speak truthfully about this over here, I always felt awkward within this particular group, and one in which I never felt I really belonged. I mean, if you look at that strange man in the bow tie, he's the only one that's, again, very unnecessary. But I think this was my aim itself at just trying to, I guess, stand out, but yet also deeply desiring that I belong. And in doing so over here, you'll find that, again, I have a biasness towards inclusion. I have a biasness towards making sure that nobody ever feels left out. But again, that whole vision of actually what I want to see in the future, a non-aggressive, non-capitalist, highly inclusive, very communitarian sort of society, I think is definitely shaped by my own hands, and it's shaped by my own history. Yeah. So I will probably bring you to this slide over here and give you some maybe concept around what is it I just shared with you. And what you're hearing over here is that as individuals, or at least as any one given human person, we know that we have three main data centers that both receive information as well as give information. So the head, or the cognitive space over here, is the first place in which we receive information, right? We process it here, and we also from here generate ideas and we put it out. The second space is the emotional space, right? The one in which oftentimes over here we would carry in the emotions of others, or even begin to hold the emotions of our own. Right, and this is typically what we call the heart center. So information comes in, information also from here goes out. Right? And the third area that we're looking at over here is what we call the gut. Right? This is the intuitive center. This is where conviction comes from, where your identity lives. And in this particular space, again, in our intuition, information can come in. Right? Yeah. And we know itself, right, that in terms of these three main data centers, these begin to shape the way that we experience the world, that we see the world. But I describe this as the idea that as human beings, we are a highly, highly porous species. By porousness, we mean that when people tell us stories, like in the way my mom told a story to me, she was shaping me. And she was shaping the way that I began to see the rest of my extended family, the way I began to see males within the household. And that porosity over here, she had the capacity to just speak into my life, and that became real or true. And you'll find over here you have, throughout most of your own lives, begin to be shaped a lot by the narratives of other people. And this is what I mean by the porousness. Whether it be the media or closer families or friends or people itself who have never really liked you, or people itself that might have even bullied you, that these particular stories over here have actually had a porousness, that they enter into our collective space, enter into our emotional space, and enter into our core identities of who we believe that we are. And I want to say this over here, that for each of us as human beings, even the ones that are listening into the audience, listening in as audience right now, actually there are preferred places that we tend to live, right? And this is a profound implication of how we as individuals begin to really see the future, right? So what do I mean by that? You see, each of these domains in which we necessarily reside in, or which you habitually practice, it could be part of your occupation, it could be part of even just your personality. But if you look at each of these three, actually there are three chronological spaces in which each of these spaces begin to live, right? The brain, or the cognitive space, is the only part of our body can really travel 30 years, 40 years into the future. You notice your emotions can't really move there, right? They don't move there largely because of the idea that emotions don't exist primarily in the future. It has not happened yet, and you wouldn't necessarily have a reaction or a response to actually what is it you're seeing. But you have a response or reaction to what is it you are imagining. But what takes you there is really our head. So many people who live in the cognitive space have an ability itself, right, to project great anxiety, great hope, strong imagination, strong fantasy. But this is basically the place that takes us into the future, and it lives in the future. Right? Our emotional space, a lot of times over here, by this I don't really mean emotions, but rather moods. Moods are what we call moods are what we mean by emotional habits. So some of you tend to be more resigned than normal, right? Some of you could be turned out to be more frustrated. You notice that frustration features very strongly in your own life, or you may experience the fact that gratitude may begin itself to be an emotional habit. But whatever emotional habits that we have developed as people, right? Each of these emotional habits over here actually are informed by stories that we have lived or lived in the past, right? In my case over here, it would be a stern story of failure. So you may notice over here that even for this particular talk, right? I remember I was holding much anxiety over it. And the internal script that I was struggling with is, what on earth are you doing giving this particular talk? Given the fact that, the words I use to describe myself is I'm the loser, or I'm the failure in life. And it's one in which I have yet to really begin to shake. I've done a lot more work to bring myself to more health. But there are still incidences in the past that largely shape how I see the future. So even though as I'm going into the future, and it can be perceived by many is that my future might be bright, the funny thing about my experience is I don't really think so. Yeah. And there's a part of my past that shapes how I see what's possible and what's not. The third, or this gut area over here, very much lives in the here and now. The belief over here around the gut instinct is that it really is requiring us itself, right, to begin to say, okay, so what can we do now, right? Our convictions, our character, our choice over here to begin to move. And when we're doing this, oftentimes people who live within the gut area, they tend not to look at the past or the future, right? And it's actually both are pointless, right? The future is complete nonsense. it's fiction, and the past is the past, right? And it has no real relevance or significance to who we are now. And what the future is really just an accumulation of today's, right? So if you're asking me itself, right, what's going to happen in 2030, I'm not sure anybody knows. I mean, some people might use their head to guess, but the bottom line itself is those who live within the gut area just saying, actually, let's not, even bother spending energy thinking about that, because largely how we live today and tomorrow, it accumulates, and that's what essentially the future is made up of, a huge accumulation of today's. right? Which is why I think preparing for this talk has brought me into a pretty reflective space. It's one in which, if we begin to cast and look far and wider into an idea of what the future might look like, I really wonder whether or not we are seeing the same thing. I wonder, which part of you do you live in most? Are you able to see an unadulterated future that is not colored by the past? Do you have a sense of imagination over here where you feel this is what's unprecedented, this is what's new, and this is what could be what's exciting? Are you to a space over here where you've had maybe deep trauma in the past, or experiences where you can't seem to shake from yourself? And in doing so over here, how does that begin to shape how you see the future? Right? And if you look at basically all your intuitive instincts about the present, how many of you are just practically saying, yes, but the future is now? Right? And we just have to live a really good day at this convention. I speak to you about this over here because as we go through these ideas, I'm here to talk about these, maybe have a diagnosis over how our country is starting to shape up in terms of how we're describing a post-COVID future. And the title of this talk was Leadership, Crisis, and Emotion. And the way itself I've shaped up emotion for you, that the emotional experience of, I guess, a lot of people have diversity simply because of the three main data centers in which we tend to live in, right? But crisis has brought us to a space where the question is now similar, right? And for once in a very, very long while, the entire world is thinking about the same thing. We are all thinking about our future and how will the world change? What was actually will happen? So this picture that I put up over here is a typical picture that you will necessarily see when people describe the future, like cars, strange buildings that are not very architecturally sound. And if we look at all these particular buildings over there, right, what you will tend to begin to see is that the future, although exciting, tends to not be complex. And it's an important place that we have to talk about when it comes down to even Singapore and how we begin to vision cast. I personally find that I warned from the beginning, I need to speak quite plainly. And a lot of our bureaucracy, or even our politicians, they do use the future as a means by which to cast aspiration, or common aspiration for all of us to begin to move into. But I worry over here because this type of future doesn't deal with the complexities that we're experiencing today. The future is always the ideal. It's neater. It doesn't carry baggage. It's something itself will go, oh, that's a nice picture. I love to aspire towards that. But I'm quite sure when we finally get there, it'll be as messy as it is today. And doing so over here is something where I wonder whether this kind of future in which you're seeing from this picture is a convenient escape from what we need to address now. The emotional space that has come from the past, however, is actually far more tricky. Yeah. It's one in which we are seeing over here whether or not we are experiencing an idea of whether we do well in school, whether we have lost a loved one, whether we might suffer from a disease, cancer, whether or not we grow up in contexts or environments that are extremely painful politically, or so on and so forth. All these types of history that you're looking at over here, the state of the family, the state of the country, they do begin to define for ourselves whether or not we can begin to aspire with flying spaceships and everything else. In this type of future, things are not unprecedented. They are predictive. That as a result of actually what's seen in the past, incident 1, 2, 3, 4, I can only conclude that the future is actually number 5, right? That is just the same pattern that repeats itself again and again. So if he's always been like that, he will be like that in the future. And this is, I think, where it's quite challenging, because you find that if politicians or leaders over here live primarily within the domain of the future where it is clean and it doesn't deal with complexity, but yet many citizens over here who are living in a space where they want their pain to be heard or acknowledged, that until it's acknowledged, then actually you can't blame me for being pessimistic or cynical. And until it's acknowledged and healed and moved aside, it is very hard for us to jump into, the other sort of future that many people in the headspace tend to begin to see. So there's something within the emotional space that needs to be addressed, right? Because the past has profound impact on how we live our future. I apologize for the high-res image. The third one that you're looking at over here, one where I tend to live in myself, right? I know I've been struggling quite a bit, because even in the course of this whole COVID-19 period, I think my phone has been endlessly having messages coming in, far more higher volume than normal. And many of them over here actually are from ex-students or people itself who have trained or taught before. And the whole question is, what do I do now? I feel so uncertain about the future. I feel nervous about the future. I feel that I'm not going to survive very well. And the whole notion itself is basically that they spend their time thinking about that particular future. That their past has been trend 1, 2, 3, 4, and they know itself that the future will certainly be 5. And honestly, I think in the first 2 or 3 months of listening, multiple narratives that essentially running this, I was patient enough to begin to respond and try to really address their fear, try to predict or assure them of a future, a positive future that would come. But I've started to shift that narrative and started to say over here, but really, how productive is that? In better times, I think we didn't have that many conversations about uncertainty. These days, I'm experiencing at least 8 to 9 daily. And in doing so over here, I have come to begin to respond by simply saying, actually, no one knows what your future is going to be like. But what I do know is what today will be like. And I do know that from a purely conviction point of view, yeah. I mean, today is what? Tuesday. Yeah. Your Friday is an accumulation of Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Yeah. And if you play those days well, your Friday shapes up a certain way. And I think that's the best thing I could possibly begin to offer anybody there. And I speak from personal testimony that I had no idea that at 46 I'll be sitting in this particular space giving this particular talk. Those of you who actually know my personal history, I've suffered from mental illness, I suffered from suicidal tendencies. I struggled quite a lot within my 20s and early 30s. But I remember one day just simply saying, I will do good for today. You know what? Just 20 years later, it's sort of accumulated and it built up, I guess, to a body of work which I can say I can be proud of. So when we look at a picture like this, where people are rallying together and say, this is the Singapore of the future that we want to see, and this is what's really going on, I really wonder whether we're talking about the same thing. I know that one particular way of actually envisioning the future is to speak into other people's pain, right? You rally enough for that pain, you draw it all together, and generally you get, a group or a large system over here that feels heard. And I'm not saying, therefore, that that's necessarily better, but it's somebody itself addressing the past, but using the past to essentially bring people together and having them begin to continue to thrive and live in that pain. And a lot of times over here, if we are future-oriented, the idea is not to, make the past bigger. Right? The idea itself is to name the past, heal it, so that we can begin to move forward. Yeah. And I worry itself a lot about politics, right, currently in Singapore, because there are a lot of, I guess, leaders right now that seek to begin to gain resonance or referent power, essentially from naming the past, but not naming any way itself in which this particular past can be healed, addressed, acknowledged, closed. Right? So I think this is a very complex situation about moving forward, right, and looking at how leadership can move, right, each of these people. So I bring this up over here. So those of you who are actually familiar with Edelman's index, and it's a trust index that begins to look at how much trust has been going up or down, right, primarily within society. And the green circle actually is showing the number of countries that are still under 50%. And that number, or the green circle, has been growing almost every single year. This year, I think even more than others over here, I'm quite sure the green circle will be even larger. Right? And you'll find over here there are very few countries in the world where actually, the people still trust. So Singapore still stays 2016, 17. The recent result in 2020 is not out yet, but 2019, we're still within the top 5, right? We're bordering roughly about 60% or so, right, in terms of people who trust institutions. But we're one of the few countries over here which actually have that particular, I guess, capital or trust to begin to shape something into the future or to move into the future. But the reason why I bring trust up suddenly in all these particular ideas is that if we're talking about addressing the past, right, in people's pain, if we're talking about, believing in a certain future, a certain utopia that we draw as a picture, or if we're just even talking about living a good day today, that really is about whether I trust myself, whether I trust the people who might have hurt me, right, to begin to contribute towards my healing, and whether I trust the leaders that to take us into the future. And I'll say a lot of the efficacy, a lot of the legitimacies of all the future actually comes down to whether we trust everybody that contributes to it, right? And I worry right now, the reason why I am so committed itself to doing the work that I do is because I truly believe that if our future is going to have any weight to it, it must have legitimacy. Not just about political parties also, but the vision must be something which all of us believe. And all futures, right, the main currency is really belief. Right? I trust you. I believe in you. Marriages, right? You tell me whether or not your future of next 50 years is going to be guaranteed. Well, that's already a question of trust and belief, right? Currencies. Can you tell me yourself whether this currency is going to last, right, for the next 20 years, 30 years? Well, I would suggest it comes down to trust and belief. That the power within the future primarily comes down to whether we trust one another, trust ourselves, trust whoever is self-esteeming. And in doing so over here, I think the global climate is showing that actually trust is diminishing. So when trust diminishes and belief diminishes, the future also tends to be weak, compromised, and it doesn't have legitimacy. So I found this picture actually quite strange because this picture with the shaking hands and this is Lee Hsien Loong very happy. Then looks like he's got this deer in the headlights thing. But he's looking over here, and this is really very much a picture where I don't know whether I tend not to be cynical, but I believe over here this is a move not to fragment the country further. And it's one basically actually saying, as leader of opposition, this is what we want to acknowledge you. Singapore's moved into a new stage. We'd like to begin to see, even political parties work together. And I would hope over here that the effort is really to start looking at different political countries, new political countries. That the feedback we have given in this election has been strong enough to just simply say, we don't want, dirty politics anymore. Yeah. And we would like basically for you all to make friends, have friendly, I won't say friendly debates, but have strong debates over here. But fundamentally, don't lose trust in one another. Don't lose trust in each other's intentions. And don't tear down institutions or tear down each other this way. Because that starts a tit for tat, right, sort of behavior. And I'm hoping over here that Singapore's wonderful index, right, in keeping trust very high, continues to actually contribute, right, to our shared future. So that's ArtScience Museum. So as a sort of a closing to this particular presentation that we're looking at, I wanted to make a practical suggestion to suggest that many of these conversations that need to take place where fractious parts of our own society need to be healed, new trust be established again, we do need the existence of civic spaces. We do need the existence of places where we can have conversations like this, where we can come together as a nation or a group of people and really work through these ideas. And I think at this current juncture, we don't really have anything really built up yet. Community centers have yet to evolve into that particular model, that particular function. But I think groups like ArtScience Museum or multiple other entities within Singapore, I think are trying their best to start the conversation more and more. And doing so over here, I think I'll be happy to start taking some questions or things like that. But I'm of the opinion that at least for myself as a citizen, the next 15, 20 years is about building more and more places like this. There's a culture for debate, but an outcome for trust. And I believe that's an important piece to put in, largely because I really want to see a future for Singapore that I trust and I believe in. But I need my fellow, I think, citizens to believe the same. Yeah. Okay. So I'm taking this over here to time of maybe just questions. I know Honor will be taking over from this point over here, but thank you for that short half an hour of your attention. I hope that brought some sort of insight for you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Tong Yee, for that insightful and moving presentation. I think it's something that many of us needed to hear right now. For those of you who have joined us quite recently, we're live online at ArtScience at Home, the online program of ArtScience Museum. And today's event is streaming live on YouTube and Facebook. We'd love to hear from you during the next half an hour or so of Q&A. So if you do have questions for Tong Yee, just pop them into the comments of either YouTube or Facebook, and we'll see them as they come in. We'll take as many questions as we can, but we know there's going to be a number of questions. So if we don't get to your question, we apologize in advance. Yee, whilst our audience is kind of composing their thoughts and thinking about what they would like to ask you, I guess I wanted to reflect on the fact that a lot of the work that you do at the Thought Collective, as you shared, is about empathy and emotion. And this is a year which has been shot through with tragedy and turmoil. And I guess having the skill to understand how to process emotion in this year is more important than ever. So I wanted to start by asking what sounds like a simple question, but I know it's not, which is, how are you feeling? You know, so much of what you've shared is, you know, around how leaders are experiencing, you know, kind of so much uncertainty in this time of crisis. And you've given us reason to feel reflective, but also optimistic. What's one good word to describe how you're feeling as a leader right now?
One word. Wow.
Or maybe.
I think if I were to begin to just talk about my own sentence, I can be authentic, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Exhausted. Slightly discouraged. Definitely, I've been waking up with a sort of nauseating feeling in my tummy. I'm quite sure it's just not curry, but yeah, I've been carrying it for almost about 2.5 months, 3 months right now. Yeah. And I don't know how to keep coming into contact with, I guess, the amount of disruption and turmoil that I'm seeing, at least in my part of the world. So in doing so over here, that's largely how I've been feeling. Yeah, I would like to say, actually, I don't really feel too great.
Yeah, I think that's a feeling that many people are feeling right now. So I think it's good to talk about it in an event that's about feeling the future. Yeah. Also, a lot of the work that you've done as an entrepreneur, as an educator, and as a speaker is really about, I guess, building up the understanding of the importance of developing a national narrative for the country that you love, Singapore. You touched on this a little bit kind of towards the end of your presentation, but I wonder if I can ask you to elaborate a little bit further about what you see as some of the primary challenges that Singapore faces due to COVID-19 over the next year or two.
I think in the context of actually what you're asking right now, and I hope this is not too much of a segue in terms of a response. No, I don't know whether you remember, how long did it take for you to find your own identity or your own place or your own sense of, I don't know, agency or the future? Did you discover it? A long time?
Lots of decades.
Yeah. And I think it's really similar for myself. I think I really stumbled upon maybe what I would perceive to be my future. Only in my early 40s, maybe about 6 years ago. Yeah. And before that, I think I was still fumbling around, not really sure about it, and uncertain. And I largely want to use that as a metaphor, right? That if it takes human beings that long to begin to find our place, such that we have even a sense of our future. And I want to say right now, as an individual, I think I do. I have a better sense of my future. I understand what I'm willing to be committed to for the next 20 years, 25 years or so, right? It might face some disruption here and there, but generally, I know my trajectory. I highly suspect over here that Singapore doesn't know its trajectory. Given basically independence until now, I think our trajectory was quite obvious. But we've brought ourselves to this particular state right now. And I think right now it's not just about the leadership defining for us what that new future will be like, but rather whether we have enough cultural resilience to stick around until we figure out what that future is like. And if you remember the painful journey we took to find our own selves, that required a lot of resilience, dark as like you say. Yeah, I think Singapore's going to hit many more bumps. Yeah, and I'm hoping that resilience becomes a key part of our culture, so that when our future does present itself again, and we can clearly see it as a nation, that at least we will have enough people would have stuck around to bring that future into a reality.
Yeah, good. That's a great question. It segues quite nicely into the first question I'm going to ask from our audience. We've got many, but I'm just going to start with this one because it feels quite relevant to what you've just shared. This is from Rangana Yaki, who'd like to hear your views on personal leadership, i.e. leading ourselves, and how that can help and assist with leading our families, friends, and colleagues. What's required of leaders now?
Thank you for that question. I am really, at least for myself, a personal champion and advocate of personal leadership. I don't believe that authority can fix problems for us. I come to a space over here where I feel that in the diversity of what Singapore is facing, we need people who exercise personal leadership and who exercise leadership within their immediate circles and communities. And I think pushing things itself to government reach or whatever the case that we're doing over here isn't just good. It's not going to be what will take Singapore into the future. So things I think that we can do for personal leaders. If I could offer this as a sound and cliche advice, is take care of yourself. The more that we are like myself, the more that I haven't slept, the more I haven't eaten well, the more as I'm not exercising, the easier I get triggered. And I think that's when my survival instincts kick in as opposed to my leadership instincts. Yeah. So I really would say over here that don't overlook the idea of taking care of yourself so that we don't, I guess, create even more shit. Yeah. So
good answer.
Yeah.
We actually had a lot of comments from the floor, Yee, when you were speaking about the head, the heart, and the gut kind of section of the talk. And I can't ask all of them because there's so many, but I think Dave Lim's question kind of summarizes a few people's thoughts here. He says, well, isn't hope the emotion that we have that's projected into the future? Why are we willing to bear the pain of today if we're not sort of hoping for a more potentially pleasurable future? And he gives the example of parenthood. Not only do you kind of often put your emotions aside in order to plan for your children's better future, but you're perhaps kind of giving up things in your personal life for this future trajectory of your children. So is hope an example of an emotion that can live in the future?
It does. I was trying to actually draw the idea that where is the emotion originating from? I don't know whether this is too conceptual as a response. The brain is able to conjure up stories that have not yet happened. So hope is a story that's yet to happen. Anxiety is a story that's yet to happen. But it is the brain that generates that particular story, the creation of what has not happened yet. So hope is an emotion, but it originates from the narrative or the story that we create for ourselves. A lot of the emotions that we live in resignation is not necessarily a story that we created. It's a story that we lived. It's already in the past. So the idea itself that we're talking about is that hope, is definitely an emotion that lives within the future. It travels to the future. It originates from a fiction. My personal belief over here is that a choice between anxiety and hope, then choose hope. I mean, they're both stories. But at the end of the day itself, right? What I tend to linger in anxiety less. Yeah. Okay.
So Yingxi Beth made a comment rather than a question, but I think it actually connects quite nicely with what you've just shared. She observed on the uncertainty of the future. I realised, this is Beth speaking, that I wish that Mr. Lee Kuan Yew was still around, because I think he would have had an idea about how to deliver us from this chaos. Any comments on that, Lee?
I'm not so sure he would have an idea, but rather he would have had the conviction to say, we will get there. The strong emphatic relationship, the strong emphatic sort of like leadership that comes in and says, we don't know yet, but I'll be damned if I don't figure it out myself. And that's a lot of what we mean by the conviction story, to say that a lot of lingering within the future, we can plan, but it will come down to what we do today. And I think I don't want to begin to put too much, I guess, power to the myth of this particular man. Lee Kuan Yew was a committed man. He was a committed man. And yes, he had a team of people who were visionary. And I think it was that combination that really brought Singapore to what it was over here. But the imagination, I think if you can really read enough of the biographies, it was coming actually from his team. And he was the one that would, okay, then I will drive this with my conviction. Yeah, and I think that is not something which is not a part of each of us.
We've got a lot of comments and questions, as you might expect, about the concept of resilience. I'm just going to ask one, because there's a number, and this one seems to sum up the kind of sentiment quite nicely. How can Singapore as a country grow in resilience? You said, of course, that takes time, but what if time is not on our side?
Right. I don't know whether the person who asked the question just recently attended the resilience workshop that I conducted. So that's a 5-hour workshop. We're just talking about resilience alone. But if I could just quickly summarize that particular piece over there. First, it's meaningless to talk about resilience if we don't first talk about pain. Because the reason why we need resilience is precisely because it's painful. Right? Because every time it starts getting painful, we want to jump out. Right? It says, okay, I don't want to do this anymore. And resilience, actually, a lot of it is about the capacity to stay in the pain, right? Because we believe that in the long term, some sort of positive result will come out, right? And the pain will be worth it, right? So there are a few things over here as a nation, or at least as people, that we can do to begin to build resilience. Persistence comes from personality, which means some of us have the gift of actually being naturally persistent, okay? But that's coming from personality. Perseverance comes essentially from experience, that we persevere because we have achieved before, or somebody else has achieved before and assures us, just persevere, you will get there, right? A sense of purpose, mission, all these particular things also allow us to stay in the game, right? And one in which suddenly Singapore is sort of missing. We don't know what our purpose or our story is right now. And I'm a bit worried itself, because the more that we linger, the more the resilience can be a bit brittle, right? By having ample resources coming in from either networks, financial capital gives us real reality in terms of the hope. And of course, imagination, courage, these are all amazing things that will start to propel us forward. So maybe, Honor, I could give you the slides over here, which you could send to your participant, to your audience there. But there are some really wonderful models, but we should start looking at distinctively what exactly is resilience, so that we can build it into some sort of strategy. So, Honor, I didn't catch his name. Could you repeat his name again?
That question came from, that was from Yingxi Beth again.
Okay. Yeah. Beth, I'm not sure whether you did attend the workshop, but if you did, Yeah, actually, it's most likely there. If not, maybe just drop me an email. You can find my email online, and I'll be happy to send to you the diagrams. Yeah.
I really
then
recommend
you can talk.
if you guys have the opportunity of attending that workshop, if the Thought Collective give it again, I highly recommend it. It was really pivotal for me in the middle of the circuit breaker to kind of unpack some of these ideas. And yeah, huge thanks to you for summoning the courage and the resilience to do it, because it was not easy. Yeah. I know. We've got a question from Drew Yu. What's a good way to hear the pain of others when everyone is in a sort of echo chamber due to social media algorithms?
Don't live in a social media algorithm. I don't mean to be trite or silly about it. It's funny, this entire crisis, I've not touched Facebook. Facebook was my entertainment. I go in, just to troll and things like that. But I think in the past maybe few months or so, I've been spending a lot more time within communities, speaking to the people who are going through whatever they're going through, and I respond a lot to when people ask questions, and I try to make time to meet together with them. I hope I don't come across too hard, but don't make yourself a victim of social media. Those are your choices, and if you feel that you're living in an echo chamber, then don't. Yeah. Yeah.
So get off social media is the advice here. Good advice. We've got a question from Jackie, who asks, how do you personally overcome strong emotion and anchor strongly on your gut?
I don't really, actually. So even for myself, the head, the gut, and the heart actually are a wonderful democracy. They offer me insight. Each one gives a new data point over any one given situation. I tend to listen to all three quite actively. So I do listen to my emotional moods and my stories because that's very much a part of me. Yeah, so it's not about shifting from one to another. If you're asking about the habits of just simply being convicted enough to live a good day now, then as with all habits, and again, I don't mean to be trite about this, but I think I've done this work long enough to understand actually the answers are pretty straightforward. You are what you practice. And if you can spend less time angsting about the future, have plans, but you don't get angst about it. And simply focusing on today, and you keep that practice going, you give it yourself 60, 70 days, you'll be within your psyche. Yeah.
That habit forming window that you've spoken about quite extensively. Do you think, this is a question from HWCR, do you think Singapore's leaders lead with a dominance on any one of the three data centres, head, heart, gut? How could their leadership be improved in terms of how they utilise the three data centres?
My personal belief is that there's a very, at least for the incumbent, there's a very strong aversion to pain. I can't name this for every single politician in terms of national leaders out there. I know some are much more open to sitting in pain than others. But I do recognize the fact that if there's one main area itself that's actually quite lacking right now, is the ability to sit with another person's pain and believe that they're somehow responsible or they have to fix it. Oftentimes over here, people's pain is not something that they need you to fix, but they need you to be present enough to take in. Yeah, and in doing so, I think it's a challenge when we're dealing with as much as we can in terms of, I guess a country as complex and sophisticated as Singapore, that national leaders are also expected to sit with, your pain and each other's pain. And I'm not so sure I need my national leaders to empathize with me that way. What I do need is other people to empathize, to listen to the pain and to communicate to our leaders in a way that they can listen. I don't want them to be therapists. I don't think that's their role. Yeah.
Actually, this is a related question asked a little while ago by Sarah Ling, who thanks you for this wonderful sharing. She says, I'm curious, in the current climate of uncertainty and crisis, in the present, I suppose we're still living with the pain presently, and it's not yet become something of the past. So how can we name this pain and begin to heal it when we're still living in it, especially when the shape and form of this pain is continually morphing and evolving on a day-to-day basis? Good question.
Yeah. And I think what is coming from, or at least what's showing up for me right now is, that's what I believe is to be precisely the work of the non-essential people that Singapore thinks are non-essential. I think that's, what I love about, I guess, this dichotomy and synergy in ArtScience Museum is how do we take that particular listening, right, and be able to take what feels like random, tableaus and pictures of emotions that, people are going through and bring it into something coherent, cogent, relevant that we can name on behalf of. So I know my work over here sits around a constant listening, right, of people. And I don't think I've got clarity yet to name this present pain that we're all going through. I know because I practice this almost every single day. At least I have one conversation sitting in someone's pain. That I have a better chance than most to be able to figure out how do we name this well. But Sarah, you're right. I think without naming it, it's very hard for us to begin to address it for what it is.
I'm going to take one more question from the audience, and then we'll have a little closing kind of wrap up. The last question is from Serene King, who asks, can you share what you feel makes something complex and what your approach is to complexity?
I think before we are Singaporean, we are humans. Before we are Indian or Malay or Chinese, we are human. Before we have any sexual orientation, we are first human. And I appreciate the fact over here that complexity does not come from the ecosystem per se. That's a highly sophisticated, complicated system. But the complexity, this constant disruption and change is actually really coming from us as humans. I appreciate complexity to be, I guess, the work of diversity and these diverse humans that we have. All that shifting and changing and God knows whatever it is that we're going through. And my own practice discipline is really just trying to understand the human. I very rarely spend time understanding the issue. I understand the humans that are driving this issue. And I think that has allowed me to find a lot more commonality in working with people, as opposed to this is about, the Indians and the Chinese and the Malay coming together. But rather, what can we all resonate with? And I think until, I don't mean to pun this over here, until we find that common ground, there's very little hope for peace. So it's my work, right, to find that particular middle ground. How do we meet each other?
Well, that actually brings us quite beautifully, I think, to kind of the final question that I have. Since tonight's event closes our conference, which is about the future, I wonder if we might end on that note by asking you to look ahead for us. You might remember when you went around the exhibition 2219 Futures Imagined, that it ends by asking visitors to write down their hope for the future. So I wonder if you can close the Feeling the Future online conference by sharing with us your hope for the future.
Can it be a Singapore hope?
Absolutely.
I hope that my nation will still continue to shine for the world, that because we're a brave country and a courageous country, and we sit and dare to move in each other's pain of what we're going through, that we will find a way out of this, and we will be able to demonstrate that cities as, I guess, complicated as Singapore, can figure this thing out. And hopefully if we can, you can too. And it is that hope of precedence, that we set that precedence, that I believe will not only be encouraging for us, but will be a point of relevance that we will continue to be relevant to the rest of the world. To see, what leadership and courage can really bring us. Yeah. And I think it is it's for this time, right? For such a time as this, that this generation, this is our crisis. And I think we have the leadership to be able to get out of this well. That's my hope.
Thank you, Tong Yee, for that fantastic kind of ending. Reaching the final of the Feeling the Future online conference that's spanned the length of the entirety of Art Science at Home and has helped us as a team navigate Singapore's lockdown, the circuit breaker, is actually a bit emotional for us at Art Science Museum. But coming to a conclusion like this with you, Tong Yee, the week of Singapore's National Day has a lovely resonance to it. I also want to thank all the speakers who contributed their thoughts and feelings about the future over the last 4 months. And I know that many of them are listening today. So thank you, Ariel Muller, Scott Smith, Cheryl Chung, Superflux, Lizzie Muller and Lynn Froggatt, Richard Hassel, and finally you, Tong Yee. We've also thoroughly enjoyed having you, the online audience, with us for the duration of the conference series. The questions that you've asked have helped us really unpack our own emotions during the last 4 months. It wouldn't have been the same without you. I know many of you have been with us for all the talks, and we really feel like you're friends of the museum now. We hope to welcome you back to the next Art Science at Home live event. It's actually connected in some ways to what we've been talking about today. It's called Let's Talk About Where We Live. And it's a live workshop for children on the 14th of August that explores the Singapore neighbourhood of Jalan Kukoh and what that might tell us about where we live. Until then, thank you so much for being with us tonight, and good night to everyone.